My name is Jeff Resnick. I'm Chief of the History of Medicine Division here at the National Library of Medicine. Thank you for joining us today here in the NLM's Lister Hill Auditorium, and those of you watching remotely and following us on Twitter using the hashtag NLMHistTalk. My colleagues and I are thrilled that you can join us for today's program, which is part of the 2019 NLM History of Medicine lecture series, which is designed to promote awareness and use of the NLM historical collections for research, education, and public service. Excuse me, in biomedicine, social sciences, and the humanities. The series also supports the commitment of the National Library of Medicine to recognizing the diversity in its collections, which span 10 centuries, encompass a range of digital and physical formats, and originate from nearly every part of the world. And also, of course, to appreciate the individuals of various disciplines who value these collections and engage them to advance their research, their teaching, and their learning. All of our lectures are free and open to the public, and they're all live streamed globally and subsequently archived by NIH videocasting, thanks to a generous gift to the National Library of Medicine from the Michael E. DeBakey Medical Foundation. Today's program follows on a January 2018 workshop called Viral Networks, an advanced workshop in digital humanities and medical history, which was hosted by the National Library of Medicine through its long-standing partnership with the National Endowment for the Humanities, and made possible by the support of the NEH through a grant to Virginia Tech. That workshop brought together scholars from various fields of medical history whose innovative research shows promise through the use of methods, tools, and data connected to the field of the digital humanities. Today, we join with the NEH again, they are co-sponsors of this program, to reunite 3 scholars who participated in the Viral Networks workshop of January 2018. To share progress of their research and their thoughts about the future of the digital humanities and the history of medicine during this era of ever-expanding data, both born digital and derived from digitized sources. We appreciate their willingness to join us to discuss their work and the broader context of opportunities and challenges to capture this expanding data, to curate it, and fundamentally to contextualize it to advanced research. Today's program also highlights the publication of the peer-reviewed and open access proceedings of the Viral Networks workshop, to which these scholars and many others contributed their research. The book is available through VT Publishing and through NLM Digital Collections through the URL that will be shown throughout the proceedings. Today's program also includes the co-editors of that very important book, as well as an internationally recognized public sector leader in the field of the digital humanities. Overall, then, this program is the latest chapter in the now long-standing partnership between the National Library of Medicine and the National Endowment for the Humanities to bring together individuals of multiple disciplines to think together about data and new digital tools which can advance research intersecting with the history of medicine, the digital humanities, and biomedical sciences. So welcome to all of you here and all of you watching remotely. My colleagues and I are thrilled that you can join us. Before I introduce our presenters this afternoon, it's my distinct privilege to introduce Dr. Patricia Flatley Brennan, Director of the National Library of Medicine, who is joining us to offer welcome remarks. Appointed to the directorship of the NLM in 2016, Dr. Brennan has since positioned our institution to be the hub of data science at the NIH and a national and international leader in the field. She has spearheaded the development of a new strategic plan that envisions the National Library of Medicine as a platform for biomedical discovery and data-powered health. Leveraging NLM's heavily used data and information resources, intramural research and extramural research and training programs, Dr. Brennan aims for the NLM to accelerate data-driven discovery in health, engage with new users in new ways, and develop the workforce for a data-driven future. Dr. Brennan's professional accomplishments reflect her background, which unites engineering, information technology, and clinical care to improve public health and ensure the best possible experience in patient care. She came to the NIH from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she was the Lillian Molman Bascom Professor at the School of Nursing and College of Engineering. She also led the Living Environments Laboratory at the Wisconsin Institutes for Discovery, which develops new ways for effective visualization of high-dimensional data. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brennan to offer welcome remarks. And thank you very much, Patty, for joining us this afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Patty Brennan. Welcome to those of you who are in the room and those of you who are listening to the live stream. The National Library of Medicine is very proud to be the host and home of the History of Medicine Division, and to bring this data-focused research forum together where digital humanities and history of medicine come alive through considerations of important digital tools. We recognize that across the disciplines, researchers are embracing methods that allow us to contextualize and understand the data that are available in new ways, to present this as a way for the consuming public and the thinking public to understand our resources, to understand what the National Library of Medicine holds. I'm particularly pleased about this structure being done under an open science model, which is a very, very important component of our future at the National Library of Medicine. Our partnership with the National Endowment for Humanities is also critical as we go forward to make this opportunity open to you. And I'd like to point out a couple of key aspects in this particular moment. We are here today to engage stakeholders in new and innovative ways to understand their research, to bring forward their stories. Nowhere is this more important than in a library where we bring in thousands and thousands of resources a year, and we need very creative ways to make the knowledge held in those resources interrogatable and understandable by others. This is an open access and peer-reviewed publication of the proceedings from the workshop from last year. It's an amazing book. If you've not gotten a chance to read through all the papers, if you weren't able to attend all the papers that they were presented last year, you'll find the stories in here connecting in a new way. I was particularly struck by the sociology brought forward through this experience of understanding not only about data, but about people through data. And I found the connection to important contemporary issues through the lens of history and the utility of a network very, very informative for me. The interagency partnership across our federal agencies is very, very critical for our future. Libraries alone, even specialized libraries that are reasonably well endowed as ours is, cannot do the work that needs to be done by ourselves. In fact, shouldn't. We need to engage scholars, we need to engage programs, and we need to engage policies across the entire federal sector. And the possibility of having this interdisciplinary engagement supported by a sister agency brings us an even better and stronger data infrastructure. I'm very mindful that the historical, qualitative, and quantitative approaches in the history of medicine are going to be complemented by new tools. The discovery and the usefulness of those tools requires that we engage the scholars in the history of medicine in posing questions and in developing new ways to answer those questions. So I look forward to the launch of this conversation this afternoon. I hope you have an enjoyable experience and go back and look at the volumes. It's wonderful. Thank you and welcome to our guests.
Thank you very much, Patty. It's now my pleasure to introduce our forum participants, and I'm going to do so in the order of their appearance on our program, and briefly so we can move directly to that program. Our first speaker will be Dr. Christopher Phillips, who is an assistant professor of history at Carnegie Mellon University, where he's researching a history of statistical analysis in mid-century medicine. Dr. Phillips will be followed by Dr. Andrew Rees, a researcher at the Wisconsin Center for Education Research and a fellow of the Department of Medical History and Bioethics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His current historical research focuses primarily on the history of food, nutrition, and health, and he explores methods for analyzing historical sources using a combination of qualitative and quantitative approaches. Following Dr. Rees is Dr. Sarah Runcie, assistant professor of history at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Her current research focuses on the intersections of decolonization in Africa and histories of global health. Following these three speakers, we'll hear comments by three individuals, beginning with Brett Bobley, director of the Office of Digital Humanities at the National Endowment for the Humanities, and then the co-editors of the Viral Networks book, which you've heard so much about and much more to come. And these are Dr. Thomas Ewing, professor of history at Virginia Tech. Tom's current research explores the intersection of medical history and the digital humanities in the context of the Russian influenza pandemic of 1889-1890. And Catherine Randall, doctoral candidate in rhetoric and writing at Virginia Tech, whose research focuses on ethical practice in clinical and public health communication, specifically regarding resettled populations in the United States. And congratulations to Catherine for passing her dissertation prospectus just yesterday. So hot off the heels of that, you're with us. It's wonderful. Congratulations. And following Catherine's comments, we'll have time for questions and answers as part of our panel discussion, which I'll be moderating. So please join me now in welcoming all of our speakers and thanking them for their participation today. So over to you, Dr. Phillips, to begin our program. Okay. Very good.
I'd like to begin by thanking our hosts of the National Library of Medicine, as well as those at the NEH for supporting this project, as well as the workshop last year, out of which these papers initially came. I was not originally trained as a historian of medicine. I was actually trained as a historian of statistics, of mathematics. And I got interested in medicine, as many people do in historical projects, because I found there was a mystery, at least a mystery as far as I could tell. And that is to say, in the 1920s and teens, if you look at clinical medicine, there's very little statistically involved in medicine. Clinicians don't use it. It's not involved in drug trials. Trials are rare themselves. A half century later, by the 1970s and 1980s, statistics is central to how medicine is done. It's central to what it means to go to the doctor. It's central to understanding what ill and good health is all about. And I wanted to try and figure out how that transition happened. As I started doing the research, though, one group kept coming up, and it was a group located at building T6 on the NIH campus, and it was a group of young men, largely young men, who had just been hired, and one woman, Rose Walensky, who had just been hired as part of the Division of Statistical Methods of the Public Health Service. And I wanted to try and figure out that these names kept coming up, and I wanted to say, how would a group of people in this particular building actually change the practice of medicine? And so for my paper for last year, what I did was look at them as a co-publishing community. That is to say, look at what they wrote, where they wrote, and who they wrote with. And maybe that would provide a clue as to how you could change the practice of medicine, as decentralized and complex as medicine might be. And so indeed, I turned them into a network. And so in this kind of analysis, the red dots, if you can see, are the individuals, and then the blue nodes or dots are their co-authors. And so I started to try and visualize who they published with and how they published. And so I could ask new questions now. Why is Harold Dorn all by himself in the upper right-hand corner? What's going on there? Why do certain people co-author within the department and others not? And it was really productive for new questions. I could, of course, look at disciplines, try and find out, are they publishing in statistics journals or in public health journals or in general medicine journals? How do you change medicine if you want to introduce a new set of methodologies? I looked at whether they were cited. It turns out they were. They were cited quite extensively. Looked at who they cited them, how they were cited, excuse me. And then I wanted to take a step back and say, well, that's fine and well to start with that group. But what about the larger group of people who work in epidemiology or who work in cancer, say? And so I found everyone who had published on cancer or epidemiology in these years of 1940 through 1960s. And then I tried and figured out where my group was. And they're a little hard to see here. They're in red down in the lower, kind of the lower left-hand corner there. And one of the benefits I discovered from doing this kind of work, and I hadn't done this before last year, so this was, I'm presenting it as I discovered it in a sense, and one of the benefits I discovered is that actually there are statistical tools for measuring something like how important somebody is within a network, how central they are to a network, how connected they are within a network. And so if this group of individuals was really that important, maybe they would show up in the network as important. And so of the 800 or so authors in this part of the network, using one of the methods of trying to come up with a measure of centrality, the group I was looking at was ranked 4th, 12th, 13th, and 28th, which suggested to me that maybe they were, in fact, central. At least they were connected to a lot of other researchers. Now, this doesn't really Tell us why. Was it because they were at the NIH and therefore they were central simply because they were publishing for part of their day job here? Was it because of what they were publishing? Was it because of who they chose as co-authors? And so then I could begin the traditional historical work of trying to answer those kinds of questions. But the questions themselves have been generated from thinking about this in networked terms, from using networks to try and explore this group of individuals. I learned a lot about networks through doing this kind of project, but I also learned a lot about what historians might take it out and from the digital humanities. And there are two traditional sort of problems, if you will, with historians using new tools of network analysis or statistical tools or other kind of the broad sense of digital humanities. And one is that it requires new technical skills. Seems straightforward. Historians are used to this, though. After all, if we have a project that requires classical Chinese, we learn classical Chinese. If we have a project that requires navigating French archives that are open every other Tuesday, we learn how to navigate French archives open every other Tuesday. So this is not something new to historians, at least technical skills. The second one was a bigger issue, and that's the question of getting the material we work on into what you might call, in a deceptively simple phrase, appropriately formatted data, whatever you need. And this turns out, in my experience, to be incredibly difficult. So to give you a related example, since the workshop, I've been working with a student on digitizing and analyzing the weekly bills of mortality, the very famous London bills of mortality from the 17th century. I took this to be the best case for digital humanities. They are using numbers in a table that is already presented to you as a table. Surely this should be the easiest thing. But then when you start to think about the stability of the categories, the typographical errors that are going to be inevitable in this sort of process. You can't use OCR in most of these documents. It just doesn't work in any reliable way. And so my student spent weeks, months indeed, creating a database that then could be analyzed using statistical software in order to try and come up with a model of seasonality of epidemiological data, to try and figure out whether you could predict cholera deaths or high years of cholera epidemics through looking at the previous year's data. And so this is the kind of work that you can do, but this is the best case scenario for turning the kind of material we work on into data, and even this was incredibly difficult and time consuming. There's a huge advantage, though, when you work on medicine at mid-century, and in particular when you work on co-publication networks. And the advantage is that the scientists themselves, the physicians, the researchers, think of publication as important. So check. If they have done something important, they write about it. And if they've done something with somebody, they include them typically as a co-author. So a lot of those questions are already dealt with. And then, because of some of the people in this room, and certainly some of the people on this campus, there's already a system for looking at things that have been co-authored by physicians starting in the 1940s and 50s. And they've already been turned into amenable data for us. And so for me, this kind of project that I'm working on, PubMed, its associated tools, and the general practice of publishing in medicine turned out to be incredibly important for this kind of project. How can I use these skills moving forward? Well, one thing I'm currently looking at right now is the movement in the use of statistics from measures of association to measures of causality. And most historians of medicine will agree there was a kind of annus mirabilis in the 1964 to 65 year when two major reports were written that essentially transformed the use of statistics in medicine to one of causality. The first was the Surgeon General's report on smoking and health, which causally linked smoking to lung cancer in men. And the second was a famous presidential address by Austin Bradford Hill on the environment and disease association or causation. And both of these presented a set of criteria by which we might be able to move statistically from an association to a causal claim. And what I was interested in is how did they get here? Because when people present this kind of work, they present it as if it had either arisen directly from their head that morning or as if they always knew it, and it was just a matter of time before they wrote it down. But as historians, we know that's not how things actually happen. But it's very difficult sometimes to figure out the individual sources of this. So one approach is to use the traditional historical tools. I looked at the reviews. What did the reviewers say? And in particular, the American Statistical Association had a negative review. They thought it was inappropriate to use statistics to determine causality. Well, that's very interesting to find actually that the major biomedical use of statistics is rejected by the American Statistical Association. And so I was interested in that. That seemed like a good path to follow. I looked at the tools they used, the mortality ratio. I could actually trace that back historically. Who else uses mortality ratios in order to determine expected versus observed deaths? And then, of course, I can go to the National Archives. I can look at their conversations, see what they talked about, who was talking about certain kinds of things at the meetings. What I really want, though, is what goes unsaid. That is to say, all the stuff that they just take as assumed, and that's what's really hard to capture. But thanks to these tools that I developed over the last year, I started to have a new way of approaching this question. So for instance, I created a co-authorship network of anyone who is associated with the Surgeon General's report, with epidemiological textbooks from the 1960s that introduced terms like web of causation or other measures of causation into clinical medicine, and with Austin Bradford Hill and his own collaborators. And so then I could start to use the same tools to try and figure out what I might be missing, who might have been talking about it for the 30 years prior to the 1960s, but not publishing, or maybe they were talking about it in ways that are not captured by the publications. And so sure enough, my group of gentlemen from the NIH, they appear as predicted right in the graph. The textbook authors are in a different part of the graph. And then I noticed there was this character, Bernard Greenberg. And I had never seen, no one had written him letters, no one had talked about him, and yet here he was. He had the largest number of co-authorship relations of anyone who was publishing on epidemiology in the 30 years prior, but he's never somebody who's talked about as writing or speaking about the process of turning associations into causal claims. And so I looked into him, and sure enough, he's a professor of biostatistics. He founded at age 29, which is depressing, the Department of Biostatistics at UNC in 1949. He was a student of Gertrude Cox. She was a famous statistician of the early part of the century, and he received one of the first training grants from the NIH to develop biostatistics in clinical medicine. And so here's somebody who was probably on the documents I was reading, but didn't strike me as all that important at the time, and now I can go back and try and figure out what kind of role he's playing in this process, and indeed who he's writing with, who his co-authors are, and similar. So more generally, how do I want to conclude by thinking about the future of the digital humanities and the history of medicine. And one of the ways I have come to think about this is as a result of co-teaching a class with a statistician last fall. And this statistician made a strong distinction that historians don't often use between exploratory data analysis and confirmatory data analysis. And it's familiar from John Tukey from the 1970s to statisticians, and I think it's actually a very important distinction because historians tend to be very skeptical of using statistics for something like confirmatory data analysis. A p-value of 0.05 does not mean a whole lot to historians because after all, we don't care whether something might be rare, we care whether we can explain it. We don't care whether something might not be due to chance, we care whether we can provide a mechanism for what actually was going on. But exploratory data analysis, now this made a lot more sense to me because that's precisely how I was using these networks as I was thinking about them. That is to say, instead of simply taking chances in the archives, following whatever papers happen to be kept, or following whatever reviews happen to be written, this kind of digital humanistic tool, these new forms of digital humanities enabled me to zoom back, to find out who was missing in my earlier investigations, who was present, to ask new questions about the material, and indeed to find out what I may or may not be looking at. And indeed, what else could a historian want for an exploratory data analysis than that? So I at least propose that for our discussion as one possible way to think about the future of the digital humanities in the history of medicine. Thanks very much.
Thank you all for having me here. Thank you to the National Library of Medicine and the NEH for supporting this regathering of some of us from the original workshop. I'm just going to give a kind of overview of some of the work that I did and where I think it's going. And Chris's talk actually set up some nice things that I will try and build off of as well. And so this project that I was working on was really about understanding what nutrition was over about 200 years, so from roughly 1800 to 2000. And what sort of stimulated this was actually some research I had already been doing on the development of public health nutrition in sort of the first half of the 20th century, where I would run across over and over again quotes like this. This is from 1950, three very prominent nutritionists. The science of nutrition utilizes the combined knowledge of all fundamental and applied sciences. Even sciences such as theology, philosophy, and psychology are intimately involved in nutrition. Nutrition has been approached from many directions: the bioenergetic, the anatomical, the statistical, the social, and the mental points of view, in addition to those of the physician, biologist, and chemist. And this showed up over and over again in various forms. We'd see in reports there would be images of all of the different fields and the way that nutrition sort of spread itself across them. You would see network diagrams, nutrition at the middle, and all these connections to different fields, different approaches, different perspectives. And I really wanted to understand kind of where that had come from, because I sort of knew that, that nutrition really emerged in the 19th century as, barely different from just metabolism. It was this sort of subfield of physiological chemistry, and I wanted to know how it went from that to this sort of expansive field. But even to understand that, I had to confirm that that's actually sort of the path it took. And that can be very hard to do over a long time period when you're only just trying to read and process things yourself. You kind of want to do a sort of gut check. You want to make sure that you're not just seeing it as this kind of progression that may or may not be there. And, there are tools out there for understanding the evolution of, for example, words. So you can use something like Google Books Ngram Viewer, which takes, a very large corpus of English language publications, and they have ones for other languages as well. And you can look at the relative proportion with which various engrams, in this case it's just a 1 gram, it's a single word, appear over time. And so you can see that nutrition, over the sort of beginnings of the 19th century is pretty rare. It starts to kind of peak up around, roughly around 1830. After about the turn of the 20th century, nutrition with a capital N starts to become much more common. It's this idea that it's becoming an abstract concept and not just a kind of descriptor like the nutrition of the cell or the nutrition of animals, that kind of thing. And that, by about 1930, the two terms are basically synonymous at that point, and have the sort of same trajectory. But it doesn't really tell us what the word meant, what sort of the conceptual space in which nutrition was utilized was. So I started a project where I basically tried to collect as many definitions of the term as I could find in published literature primarily, but in medical journals, in textbooks, in scientific journals, in any kind of professional literature that I could find. And this is a haphazard sample. It's what I could access. It's what I could identify. There's a sort of large peak in the sort of 19 teens, 20s, 30s, 40s. That's partly because it was a time of sort of intense development in the field. It's the vitamins are being discovered and things like that. It's becoming a much bigger topic, both in medicine and in science. It's when a lot of professions are emerging, like dietetics, and so it's not necessarily evenly distributed, but it was enough to give me some idea of sort of what was going on as the term evolved and as it evolved as a concept. So what I did was I took all these definitions and I coded them. I coded them for basically three categories of things: references to sort of physiological ideas about nutrition, references to ecological ideas about nutrition, and references to what I've just sort of shorthanded as adaptive ideas, things that have to do with people's behavior and activity, things that have to do with their health, their state of health and disease, and their food and diet. And The question, though, was I didn't really just want to look at, the extent to which different concepts showed up, because that didn't actually really fit with sort of theoretical work on, complex concepts. So this is really coming out of work by a lot of people, but just to give two examples. So Ludwig Fleck, who talks about how sciences develop epistemological thought structures, this idea that there's a whole bunch of different concepts that get connected together or interrelated in various ways as thinking about those topics develops within particular communities. Or Charles Rosenberg's famous historian of medicine, who talked about health and disease as discursive frames, this idea that, a disease, for example, is never just a sort of biological process, right? It always has all of these other dimensions involved in its understanding that are about, professionalism, that are about social issues, cultural issues, legal and ethical concerns, and that kind of thing. And that's really what I wanted to get at. And in both these cases, these are basically network phenomena. They're basically about the ways that different ideas are associated, not just whether they show up or not. And this made sense for nutrition, right? Because nutrition has never just been about food or even about the chemical constituents of food. There's always been this idea that it's sort of connected to all sorts of other things, health and disease and larger issues as well, like economics and education and that sort of thing. And so I really wanted to understand, how this idea of a frame, how this idea of a nutritional frame developed over time, how it changed over time. But also the fact that, those changes would be sort of dynamic and somewhat amorphous, difficult to measure, right? So the question was, how should I measure them? How should I track this over, a very large span of time, in this case, 200 years? And I think network analysis is a very useful approach for this, because it actually allows us to measure the structure of associations across a number of otherwise potentially independent entities. And in particular, I was using a technique known as epistemic network analysis, or ENA, which, in the spirit of full disclosure, as I'm associate director for research in a lab that develops ENA and works with a lot of different researchers, on how to use it and apply it in various contexts. But it was a particularly good fit for this kind of project. But to understand ENA, I think it helps a little bit to just do a very quick overview of SNA, social network analysis, which I think a lot more people are familiar with. So this idea that in SNA, what you care about are the relationships between people, and those people are nodes in a network. They're all sort of these individuals, and they may not be people. For example, they could be citation networks, like some of the things that Chris was talking about, but that there's just some sense that there are these individuals that are somehow connected. And those connections or edges in network terms are defined by some explicit association, right? Who cited whom, or who co-authored something with whom, or who wrote a letter to whom, who talked to whom at a party, that kind of thing. And so that gives us that sort of mapping of those relationships. And then the idea is that you can then do a lot of intra-network measurements and comparisons to understand the properties of that network. So you can look at things like valency, betweenness, density, clustering, so on. ENA is a very different kind of network analysis tool. And it's different along all three of those dimensions. So the units are actually the networks. So for each unit in what you want to look at, you actually build an entire network for that unit. So if we're talking about people, which we aren't in my case, but just to keep the analogy going, that means that each person has a network associated with them. And those networks, the connections are defined by some kind of implicit association. This could be a cognitive network of the way that people connect ideas together. It could be really anything that you think is a phenomena associated with that person. And the idea is that for each of those connections, there will be the potential for that connection across all of your data. They may or may not have it, or they may have it to differing degrees, but that it's a way to think about a different way of comparing people. So you're not just looking at the properties within a network, you're also looking at properties across networks. So it's not intra-network measurement, it's actually inter-network measurement and comparison. And part of the reason that matters is that what ENA does is it plots networks in a metric space. And the nodes are all in fixed positions, which means that you can summarize each network by its centroid. So it's sort of like a center of mass, which takes the weighted connections, structured weighted connections into account. And what that means is that you can actually look at those networks all in a single space. And that allows you to do statistical comparisons of that space. So you can, for example, look at the networks of people in one cluster versus the networks of people in another cluster. You can develop mean networks. You can actually subtract those mean networks to see which connections are stronger in which group and that kind of thing. And so it allows you to do a lot of really fun stuff when what you actually want to do is compare networks across a number of different units. And importantly for historians, all of those connections that are built out of this data set that you either built by hand or got in some other form are connected back to the original data. So you can always go and look and see, okay, for that connection, like why is it there? What was the piece of data or the pieces of data that actually contributed? So you can actually go and kind of, this is back to Chris's point about exploratory analysis, you can go back and not only verify that your model is doing what you think it's doing, that it's actually modeling what you're hoping it is, but also go and then kind of use it as a way of exploring your original data. Like it's a guide to data that you otherwise may not be able to go through, entirely. So I used this on these definitions of nutrition, and I looked at how they changed. So in the early and mid 19th century, it's a very physiological definition. All those nodes sort of up at the top are very internal, very physiological. And as you move through time, what you get is actually much more complex networks. There's a lot more concepts that come into these definitions, and they become much more prominent, essentially, as you move into the 20th century, and certainly by the time you get to the end of the 20th century. And so this sort of fit with what I had kind of expected. It was both a confirmatory analysis in the sense that statisticians use the term, but also a way of continuing to explore these ideas. But as I pointed out, you can also summarize these networks. So these are the means of those different time periods, the confidence intervals. You can see that there's a general trend from these more sort of physiological networks to more ecological ones, and you can run statistics to see if those are actually statistically significant or if they just look different. You can also then, once you have this data, you can then explore a whole bunch of other things. So for example, I could look at what kinds of definitions came out of what kinds of works. So reference works tended to be very, very physiologically oriented. Monographs a little less so, and articles the least so, and that's probably not all that surprising when you think about the sort of publishing models in both length and in terms of focus. But again, it allows you to then go and do a bunch of exploration that would be very hard to do in a sort of strictly qualitative sense. And just to give a sense for, and these are the centroids, the means for those particular networks. And just to give a sense for some of the ways I'm thinking about this idea of like sort of how people are understanding nutrition, I also sort of tried something similar on school wellness policies. That's a much more recent set of documents. These are required by both the Child Nutrition and WIC Reauthorization Act of 2004 and the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, which is the update to school meal programs in 2010. That districts that are participating in these programs have to have one. And again, you see these same kinds of ideas about what school wellness is, and they tend to be very nutritionally focused for obvious reasons. But I kind of wanted to understand, whether this could be an approach that would get at, what's happening in these kinds of documents as well, not just in historical documents. This is actually looking across the entirety of those documents. And I started noticing that actually across different states, you would see very different kinds of networks. In this case, Florida, New York, and Minnesota all have very different ways in which nutrition is being conceptualized within those documents. And I use a little bit different coding scheme for this. It's a very different kind of data. But I was basically looking at how different ideas about food, so ideas about what's good food and bad food, ideas about are they quantifying changes? Like, do they just say like more salt, or do they say, or sorry, less salt or something like that, or do they say a 20% reduction in salt, that kind of thing? Conscious foods is just kind of a catch-all for, do they talk about sort of sourcing, labor, ethics, that kind of stuff? And with the sort of three health concepts that came up the most, which were obesity, lifelong wellness, and mental health. And it turned out that these networks all looked very different. What I started to realize was that some of this was a kind of local copying issue, and not necessarily in a bad way. But if we go back to these networks, this network and this network were sort of sample plans that were put out by the state, essentially, as like a guide for individual schools. And you can see that people actually used them, or they appeared to anyway. And I didn't have one for Minnesota, but my guess is that something similar happened. Either somebody created one and it was then sort of widely disseminated. But it also shows how influential some of those sort of guiding documents can be. And so I think, like, from a sort of policy analysis perspective, this can be a very useful approach. It gives you a measure for like how close something is to, say, a model versus how far it may be. So there is, for example, one Florida plan that's way down there by New York is pretty different from a lot of the other ones. So this is just another sort of, this is very early stage kind of pilot data stuff, but this is sort of another way of thinking about how the concept of nutrition is sort of operating within these more complex contexts. Just a very quick acknowledgement that a lot of this work was funded by National Science Foundation and Wisconsin Center for Education Research. And I will end there. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the organizers, to the National Library of Medicine and National Endowment of Humanities for welcoming all of us today. The perspective I'd like to share today on the connections between digital humanities and medical history is really as someone who's very new to digital humanities, really entirely new to digital humanities, when I joined the Viral Networks workshop last year. And in the past year, I have received a bit of a crash course in digital humanities. And so I'd like to share today about how that sort of helped me think about how scholars can really translate their existing driving research questions into more digital and visual work. And so I'm going to briefly highlight some of the work I did in the Viral Networks workshop, share some new directions I'm trying out right now in digital humanities, and then really bring these components together to think about my sort of general theme of power, naming, and representation in medical history. And then I'll conclude with some general comments growing out of these experiences about what I see as some of the potentials for digital humanities. So my current research focuses on the history of public health and medicine in Cameroon in the late colonial period in the 1940s and 50s and through the early era of independence. And specifically, I focus on the history of mobile medical teams that were created by the French in colonial Cameroon, and really on the life and legacy of these teams after independence. So I began my work in the Viral Networks workshop last year with this kind of visualization, a photograph I found through archival work. And this is how I've been working with visual materials, sort of through a more qualitative reading of what happened when French doctors and Cameroonian medical auxiliaries traveled around to rural Cameroonian villages and assembled people, as is shown here, for things like mass vaccination and examination. And one of the questions I've always been most interested in exploring in my own research is in thinking about the experiences of Cameroonians with these teams, not just as patients, not just as targets of medical intervention, but as themselves medical workers and medical auxiliaries in the colonial period. And here's just a picture of some of these kinds of medical auxiliaries in Cameroon hard at work. So as I moved into the Viral Networks workshop and bringing network analysis into my research for the very first time, I faced a challenge that is extremely common for historians of Africa working with archival material. And the challenge was that the data that I had to produce a network analysis on the work of these mobile health teams was colonial data. It was produced by European colonial administrators exclusively and was thus embedded in the interests and objectives of colonialism itself. So I grappled with my interest in representing the African labor involved in these mobile teams, given that the numbers or the names of African medical personnel were generally not included in the data I was using to create my visualizations. So here are just two of the network analyses I ended up making through the Viral Networks workshop. And so as I worked with my data, my database that I created in different ways, I discovered something that I found to be quite interesting. So if you, looking in figure 1, in which I prioritized the names of medical personnel on these teams as sort of the driving, organizing piece of data in this network analysis, in the blue circles. And when I did this, only European medical personnel showed up because they're the people named in the records. However, if I decided not to focus on names, but instead on professional titles or designations of leaders of the mobile health teams, then as you can see in figure 2, an African doctor appears in my visualization. And so I found that by running a different analysis of the exact same data, by literally choosing to unname European doctors, I could begin to uncover African medical labor in my network analysis. And so I began to see through this contrast how deliberate I needed to be in connecting data and visualization to my broader research perspectives. And so this kind of this contrast led me to think about how digital humanities might be used to advance the same kinds of questions that do drive my broader research, to move away from histories of medicine that are solely framed as sort of a diffusion of knowledge or expertise from the global north to the global south. And I think in some ways digital humanities could be particularly well suited for this task. Because in thinking more about data, about numbers of people involved in medical encounters in colonial Africa, we might have a particular opportunity to destabilize a certain kind of narrative of the singular work of a colonial doctor and account for the much larger number of Africans working as medical auxiliaries, as porters, as drivers, really driving the labor of rural medical work, even as they go completely unnamed in the archival record. So I think turning to data and visualization similarly might help us think in new ways about representing Africans who were also targets of medical intervention in the colonial period. And here's where I'm going to share some new things I've been trying out. So these are two maps, which side by side are meant to represent two different readings, two different perspectives on the same data set. Map 1 emphasizes the percentage of the population of specific villages in Cameroon seen by mobile health teams in 1950. So the larger the red dot, the more people that are being seen. Map 2 uses the exact same numbers, but flips the focus of what is represented, meaning we see a sort of an inverse. If you can see, the dots are in the same places, but their sizes are sort of flipped between the two maps. So map 2 instead shows the percentage of people not seen by the mobile health teams in a village, raising questions and emphasizing instead how Cameroonian people might have avoided or subverted the reach of colonial medicine in specific places and times. So similar to what I found in my work in the Viral Networks workshop, and drawing here on the work of digital humanities scholar Lauren F. Klein, Map 2 allows us to reframe what might otherwise be read as a sort of archival absence as actually its own kind of action. And so now that I've shared these examples from my own work, I want to sort of zoom out to think about how they connect to broader ideas about digital humanities. And the first point I want to make, I think what I see as the potential for digital humanities is about interdisciplinarity. So I think digital humanities can really sort of force us to be interdisciplinary in the best way possible. This work, as has been mentioned, requires new technical skills, knowledge of software, in which many historians have not been trained, although I do think that is beginning to change rapidly. So in my case, during the Viral Networks workshop itself, I worked closely with Nathaniel Porter at Virginia Tech to learn how to build a Microsoft Access database, something I had never done, how to set up my data in a way that could actually lend itself to network analysis, and then to use the program Cytoscape to actually create the visualizations I showed before. The maps here, I used the same data set, so I was able to hold on to that work in Microsoft Access, but now use the open source mapping program, QGIS. I had never used QGIS until I began thinking about other potential uses of this data. And my colleague in Louisiana, Dr. Brittany Cook, who teaches in the geography program, very generously worked with me to create these maps and walk me through QGIS for the very first time. And through this exchange, I really gained a much clearer sense of her skills as a scholar of what is going on in the world of geography, sort of beyond the history department. And I think she also gained a much clearer sense of what kind of research I was doing beyond brief conversations that might happen between colleagues in different disciplines. So I think working in digital humanities really requires us to step out of our disciplinary comfort zone, and I think that holds a lot of potential for different research avenues. A second area in which I see a lot of potential for digital humanities is in teaching. In our current time, I think that digital humanities has the potential to help students gain some of these similar valuable skills, while also engaging them in new ways in the kind of critical questions that are so foundational to humanities scholarship. So for example, I think there might be great appeal to students in thinking through issues like historical perspective, the power of the archive, and the power dynamics of knowledge production through things like maps. For some students who might not see these questions as vividly through primary written sources alone, digital humanities offers other platforms to teach really critical historical thinking. And this kind of teaching also has the potential to help students build skills in programs like QGIS or others, thus really expanding the capabilities that one might develop as a student of the humanities. And my third and final point, I think that digital humanities can help engage students, but also potentially a much broader public in the idea that I consider very crucial, which is that data is never neutral. That it is both how it is produced and analyzed reflects values and systems of power. And in our increasingly digital world, those working in the humanities are well positioned to bring this kind of critical perspective into the mix. So humanities scholars have the opportunity to bring forward questions about the kinds of knowledge that lends itself to the digital. Questions about whose voices and experiences or whose labor are most readily available for translation into the digital form, and how this existence itself of this information can help us think about systems of power. And so we might ask as well, as I've tried to begin to do with some of these maps, what tools or sources do we need to create different digital narratives, to tell different stories? And I think these questions will always be essential in the history of medicine, as I found in my own work in the Viral Networks project. The allure of names, of innovators, or medical leaders will always have appeal, and of course are very significant for histories of medicine. But historians of medicine might also use digital humanities in innovative ways to effectively engage broader audiences in the kinds of interrogations of hierarchies, of power, of representation that I think are also very central to historical research. Thank you.
right, that was awesome. Thanks to all three of you. That was terrific. Really enjoyed that. My name is Brett Bobley. I work for the National Endowment for the Humanities, the NEH. We are the very small sister agency to the NIH and the NSF. Our major job is to fund research in the humanistic disciplines, philosophy, literature, history, of course, archaeology, linguistics, etc. And in particular, my office, I run the Office of Digital Humanities, and I think a lot of the work that we do, as you probably heard today, a lot of the work that we fund is about sort of taking data science techniques and applying them to humanities research of one kind or another in different disciplines, like, as I said, like history or literature or philosophy, et cetera. It's interesting, about 12 years ago, the American Council of Learned Societies put out a very influential report, which was very much the inspiration for my office. It focuses on digital humanities. And they talked about the fact that digitized materials, now that we are digitizing materials at a very high rate, the digitized cultural heritage materials essentially become the data set for humanities research. And the reason I say this is an influential report, I think prior to the last 20 years, you rarely heard the objects of research in the humanities referred to as data. That was seen as more in the scientific realm. But I think that now that the things that humanities scholars study, right? Humanities scholars tend to study things like journal articles, or they study books, or they study music, or they study old newspapers. Those materials are now available in digital form in very large volume. And that really changes the game. It changes the nature for how we do our research. It enables access to far more materials than we had before. At the same time, and I think Sarah talked about this very well, there's this notion of what has not been digitized, what is missing from the record as well is an important point. That I think what we're seeing more and more in the humanities is our researchers are starting to use computational techniques, statistical techniques. It's funny how that term has changed. I think 10 years ago I might have said that we're using techniques from informatics, but today we're what we say data science. But to apply them to humanities research, and the viral networks event that these folks came out of was something that we funded. We gave a grant to Virginia Tech to work in collaboration with our friends at the National Library of Medicine, because we're very interested in helping humanities professors, or in this case, historians of medicine, learn about how they can take these techniques from data science and apply them to their research. And that's very exciting, and I think parallel work is going on in many other humanities disciplines. We actually ran an event not unlike viral networks with military historians a few years ago, where historians of the military were learning how to apply these kinds of data science techniques to their work. But viral networks is particularly interesting because by bringing in our friends from the National Library of Medicine, who have access to just an amazing collection of digital materials on the history of medicine, it's a fantastic testbed for doing this kind of exploratory digital humanities work. Chris brought up this notion of exploratory research, and I thought that was a very interesting one. And it's one that is actually discussed a lot, I think, in the humanities today. This notion of, do these computational techniques help you explore the materials for your research, or do they actually help you confirm things? And there's debate there, because I think that, as Sarah said, sometimes you can't overly rely on the data, because data can be biased, data can be missing. But I think these techniques definitely are very helpful in helping you explore and ask new questions and think about new ways to look at your data, new kinds of questions to ask that maybe you didn't think of before. So again, we're very excited about this. We really would love to see more and more these collaborations across disciplines, more people interested in ways in which we can make bridges between, for example, biomedicine and the humanities, data science and the humanities. We have joint grant programs with the NSF, we're working with the NLM. We'd love to see more of that. I think that a lot of the most exciting research going on today is taking place in interdisciplinary spaces, taking advantage of expertise in different disciplines working together. I think that some of the most interesting problems we talk about today, I mean, for example, here at NIH, of course, precision medicine is a really big deal, but there are a lot of interesting ethical aspects to that in terms of things like collecting DNA, privacy, and these are very much domains that people from philosophy and ethics, people from the humanities study quite a lot. So we're very, very keen to see more and more interdisciplinary work that brings together expertise from different disciplines. Sometimes in the United States, it can be difficult to put together those kinds of interdisciplinary relationships, in part because, honestly, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the NIH, the NSF, and the NEH are all separate agencies with their own separate missions, and they're all funded differently. And so sometimes it can be difficult to fund projects that are truly interdisciplinary. But that's why I'm grateful to the NIH for our long-standing partnership, to see if we can try to bring together these sorts of conversations. So again, thank you to everyone. I really enjoyed your talks. Thank you.
I'm Tom Ewing, and as Dr. Resnick mentioned in the beginning, I'm a professor of history at Virginia Tech, and it was a great honor to direct this Viral Networks workshop. I want to thank Dr. Brennan for her very kind welcoming remarks, and Jeff Resnick from the National Library of Medicine and his colleagues, Brett Bobley and his colleagues at National Endowment of the Humanities, for making all of this possible. There it is. So this is a long list of people who were involved in this workshop in one way or another, in its planning, in the actual sessions that we had here at the National Library of Medicine, and then also in all of the steps leading up to the publication of this volume. And for those of you who are in attendance here, we do have some copies of this volume, which you are welcome to take at the end of the session. Nothing would make me happier than to give them away, particularly to people who actually want to read them. I had a sinking feeling a few minutes ago. There's a name missing from this list, which is Nathaniel Porter from Virginia Tech. Sarah mentioned him. He actually, part of the reason he didn't fit, other than the fact that I kind of blew it, he actually fits in a lot of these different categories. He was not part of the project in the original conception. He came to the workshop. He provided data consultation throughout the workshop, and then he worked very closely with Kitty and Randall and me in the editing process, and then he actually wrote a chapter that really talked about statistical methods and network analysis. So he should be listed actually in several of these different categories, so I'm gonna go with that as a reason for leaving him out. What I'm going to talk about today is this photograph, and this is the cover, obviously, of the book. And one of the things I learned from the first book that I published, after I published it, is choose a cover photograph you really like because you're going to be looking at it for a long time. And not only does this photograph appear on the cover of the book, it now appears on the program. It's been tweeted a lot. If you go to the VT Publishing website and download the book, you'll see this photograph and so on. So I'm really glad we picked this one because I actually like it very much. This is, as it says here, this is the full photograph, not just what appears on the cover. Section of one class, section of room, Illinois, postgraduate and training school for nurses. And those of you who are and this came, excuse me, this came from the National Library of Medicine digital collections. You can go and see this image. It comes from a collection of photographs, I guess collected by and then sold by Michael Sverdling. Two things that are interesting, those of you who are librarians know, publisher not identified in brackets means that I guess we really don't know who the publisher is. In 1914, maybe. I found this photograph in the fall. Those of you who are close observers notice we had to reverse the photograph to appear on the cover. The left-to-right orientation has been reversed, and we did that so that pillar that's in the middle of the room could go down the spine of the book cover, and we could have a photograph on the front and then the other half of the photograph on the back. So there was a little bit of treachery involved in the design. I found this photograph in the fall of 2017, when we put out the call for proposals for the papers for this workshop that took place in January 2018, which became the chapters, and I was engaged in a systematic process of tweeting about this workshop, with the URL to go where there was the call for proposals, the deadline of November 8th. And what I was looking for were photographs that would illustrate the concept of networks, but in ways that were engaging and would draw people's attention. And then I put things on there like the URL and the deadline. So this is kind of where it first appeared. And in this case, it was relatively successful according to Twitter analytics. 3,935 impressions. Not exactly sure what that means. It was, in this case, this is where it gets complicated. It was tweeted by NEH_ODH from their Twitter handle, which apparently I then retweeted, with a slightly different caption. The 4,000 impressions that this earned was only 1/4 of apparently what our most popular tweet was, which was this one. Apparently, even in the world of digital humanities, sex sells. Overhood and stacks. This got 16,000 impressions. Interestingly, when the National Library of Medicine cataloged this photograph, they listed the names. Miss Harvin and Mr. Weaver in the reference division stacks. I don't know if you could get away with that now. But this was the photograph that when we finished the workshop and we started moving towards publication, then we had to choose a cover. And we spent some time thinking about different options. It's very common when you look at books about networks that they have some kind of a network diagram, and you've seen some really wonderful ones today from Andrew and Chris and Sarah. But we didn't want to do that for a couple of reasons. We didn't want to pick any single network from any one of the chapters because that would kind of misrepresent what we were doing in terms of this whole collection. We didn't just want a generic network because that doesn't really say anything, and it's actually too common in the world of network publishing. We'd started, and Dr. Brennan mentioned this early on, with the very famous network of network analysis for patient zero in the very early years of the AIDS epidemic, and the efforts to use that one diagram of sexually transmitted diseases to try and figure out how this disease was being spread. That does appear in the introduction to the book, but we didn't want to use it on the cover because, again, none of the chapters are about AIDS, so it would have misrepresented what was in there. And so I kept coming back to this photograph and thinking about it, and what it did was to kind of focus the attention on some of the themes that we wanted to do, or that we're doing in the various chapters, and that we're trying to do in the collection as a whole. And as you know from looking at the cover, we updated this by putting a network diagram on top of the photograph. And I'll give Katie Randall credit for that part of the design in working with VT Publishing and trying to kind of provide a little bit of an updating and to kind of highlight these connections. There is no reason why these are the names, the faces that are connected to each other. That's entirely fictional. Of course, being a historian, I couldn't just, I wasn't satisfied with bracket 1914. I had to know more about this institution. And fortunately, the University of Illinois Special Collections actually has a volume about the history of the Illinois Training School for Nurses, which was founded in 1880 and then closed in 1929. Very interesting first paragraph here in the early history. Purpose of the founders was twofold: to train young women to care scientifically for the sick, so establishing a new and dignified profession for women, and at the same time making available to the public a valuable service. And then secondly, the patients in the Cook County Hospital care far better than that rendered by the untrained and politically chosen attendants they employed. I don't know a lot about Chicago politics at the turn of the century, but I can imagine what was involved there. So there was some backstory to this photograph. We could locate it in a time and a place, talk about kind of what its purpose was. This volume had lists of graduates. And so you start to put not only some of the background in the institution, but maybe now some names to these faces in the photographs. Again, we don't know exactly which class this was that appears in this photograph, but they do list the class of 1914. So these are the women who graduated. And in another part in the volume, they talk about those who served in the First World War. Whether it was in a hospital in the United States or in Europe or in Russia, so you can start to again kind of situate them historically and why they're significant. But the real reason that we ended up with this photograph for the cover is it really kind of pulled together what we saw as the major themes in this volume and in each of these chapters. That networks are about people. That this is ultimately what matters in these networks, how the people are connected to each other. That networks change over time and across space. A photograph like a network diagram might capture a momentary set of connections and interconnections, but these are going to change. Something happened before that brought them to this point. Something will happen afterwards, not only as they move through time, but as they move through space. Obviously, viral networks, this is about disease. Medicine and health, and all of the chapters are about some aspect of the history of medicine. To have a photograph of nurses or those in training to be nurses seemed like the best fit for that. Networks are also about ideas and about knowledge. And again, what Andrew was talking about is very much an example of that, as well as with Chris and Sarah. But if you think about this photograph and what's happening in this training school, they're being trained. They're learning about new concepts of healthcare and of the cause of disease and transmission disease. They don't know about viruses yet. It's going to be another decade or so before those are discovered. But it certainly gives you that sense of how medicine is about the communication, the spread, the dissemination of certain kinds of knowledge. And ultimately, networks are about connections. And I think that Dr. Brennan actually said this very well when she said, stories connecting. You can look at this photograph, even though it's just a moment in time, and think about the stories that go before, the stories that come after, how they connect to each other, and ultimately think of networks as a tool for understanding. They're a representation of connections, but they're also a set of relationships. And so, this photograph as a cover really kind of pulled all of that together. And hopefully, as you look at the book and take a copy of the book, go to the website and download a copy of the book, these are the kinds of themes that will be evident to you not only in the cover, but as you read through the chapters. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Randall. I'm a PhD candidate in the Rhetoric and Writing program at Virginia Tech and one of the editors of the Viral Networks collection. And I'm really grateful to the NLM for having us here today to talk about this. This has been a really fun and interesting project. I hope that sentiment is shared by the other people involved, but I know I certainly feel that way. Early last year, Tom brought me onto the project as a graduate assistant through an NEH grant. And when we were discussing what we might talk about today, we thought it would be good to highlight my role as a rhetorician in this project, not a medical historian. My research area is in the rhetoric of medicine, which sometimes intersects with medical history, but is generally concerned with the rhetorical construction of illness and disease, and the body, technical communication and healthcare, how patients use discourse to reveal a sense of agency and values, and other discourse and writing related problems. So my own work is not currently focused on history, and if at this point you're wondering, well, she doesn't have digital background stuff, and she doesn't have medical history stuff, so why are you here? Like, why is she involved in this? I also asked myself that question. So through the process of working this out, I think we got to some really interesting contributions. So if this were a composition class, and this were the first week of class, I might introduce you to the most basic form of rhetorical theory, something like this. There's a relationship between audience, text, and speaker. And all these things are involved in any text, in any visual, in any speech. They can never be removed from that context, that what we call the rhetorical triangle. And many argue that in any given text or visual, there's an attempt at persuasion, an attempt to change the mind or behavior of the audience in some way. So it was really important for us to consider who the audience for our collection was. So who is the audience for this book? Well, there are many audiences, but we wanted viral networks to speak not only to medical historians or data scientists who might already be comfortable using these digital network methodologies, but to persuade humanities scholars who might be largely unfamiliar with those methods that digital networks might make sense or could make sense for a history project. So with that in mind, we developed questions to guide the authors of the collection as they revised their drafts that we believed kept these concerns of potential humanities scholars reading this book in the forefront. We would need to have authors explain diagrams and data to that audience in a way that considered that context. So what we did, and I confess, this is the first and only edited collection I've ever worked on the production end, so I don't know if this is common, but what we did is we had a peer editing process, not just to review, but for each author in the collection, we actually assigned 2 other scholars that had participated in the workshop to sort of edit their drafts as we went along through the spring and the summer semester. So it wasn't just Tom and I editing, but they also had peer editors. And we had some driving questions that motivated not just the writing of these chapters, but also the editing. So these are the questions that kind of guided this collection. These are the questions that I emailed out to guide this process. What is the question that network analysis is going to help answer? How are networks a useful category for the project? How do they work alongside a traditional methodological approach? And what's missing from the network? What are the limits of using networks as a tool in this project? So the first question, all of these questions were developed after the first Viral Networks workshop. These were concerns that came up over and over. The first, about what question it's going to help answer, this came out of the struggle that scholars had to get the question just right. Too broad a question and the network isn't helpful. Too specific a question and you don't have enough data to work with. So you have to finagle it. You have to know exactly, and they spoke to this a little bit earlier, you have to know exactly what kind of question you want to ask. And how are networks a useful category? We wanted to highlight the humanities piece and demonstrate how these methods work together. And for me, the last question was the most compelling, probably because I was also a humanities scholar coming to this kind of methodology for the first time. And it was easy to see this kind of method as one of limitation, focusing on too narrow of a question, too easily seen as neutral and removed from complex historical context, which Sarah talked about earlier. And this was something that came up at the workshop and something we knew we would need to put in the spotlight for other humanities scholars. And for instance, in his chapter, Andrew explains that working off definitions of nutrition doesn't quite capture the contemporary discussions around race and body weight and nutrition that were happening. So a network model of these definitions makes that context unseen. And as we heard, the idea of invisibility motivates Sarah's chapter as she demonstrates how easy it is to simply replicate the colonialist practices in the archival data. So there are ethical challenges at work, whose voices and presence come through the networks, who and what are missing. We wanted to highlight these limitations, not to turn the audience away from digital network analysis, of course. I mean, we wrote the book, we want people to read it, but to address concerns and show what can be brought to light by using these methods alongside the traditional toolkit of a historian. Chris is able to negotiate a pretty unwieldy data set in order to explore a larger network and lead to the why questions. In her chapter, Nicole Archambault's not here, but in her chapter, she explains how making assumptions that were not borne out by what was revealed in her network caused her to think differently about her archival data. And Sarah has a great quote in her chapter that I included here. It's a little feature. I raised concerns over absences in the network to suggest how historians of colonialism and medicine might consider network analysis as a tool for new visual representations of subversions, adaptations, and negotiations around biomedicine and colonial contexts. In other words, the same tools that might erase or overlook can be used by humanities scholars to illuminate and subvert, to present a different kind of argument. Now, obviously, I'm biased because I helped edit the collection this way. But another thing I find compelling about viral networks is how it captures research projects in various stages of conceptualization and completion. After the Viral Networks workshop, we had a lot of people who wanted to be involved but were concerned that they didn't have a very polished end result of using this method. They were like, well, I tried this methodology and it didn't really give me the results I was hoping for, and I don't really know what to do with that. And we embraced that, and we said, well, that's an important part of a methodological collection, is I think capturing that sort of in process, that process of learning a new technique, new skills, new tools. So we put that in there, and we encourage people to highlight that process of learning. And so that was the most fun part about this project for me, was scholars who told me over and over that even though they didn't bring any experience with those methods to the workshop, that they were eager to document the process in their chapters that eventually ended up in the collection. This is something we wanted to highlight, the range of expertise that we had in the collection. It can be very intimidating coming to new tools and having to learn new things. We talked about that earlier also. And so having established scholars say in this collection, like, hey, this was new to me, and I sort of threw my data at it, and we kind of saw what happened, and I learned a lot. For me as a junior scholar, as a graduate student, making that process more transparent is really helpful. So I think it's invaluable to have multiple scholars walking you through their first attempts, their thought processes as they choose what to include, what to discard, their projections for where the project might continue to develop, or sometimes how the project didn't turn out how they anticipated. So I'm glad to have had the opportunity to be a part of this collection that isn't just about presenting polished research findings, but also about the messiness of research, the limitations of methods, the willingness to incorporate cross-disciplinary approaches and see where they take you. These aspects have certainly informed my work and curiosity as a graduate student, and I appreciate the authors of this collection being willing to share their curiosity in a very public way. So I hope what people take from the Viral Networks project is a dedication to interdisciplinary approaches and awareness of what capturing multiple research stages can bring to this kind of collection, and an eagerness to try out new digital network methods and see where they take you. And most importantly, I hope this collection is a persuasive argument for funding graduate students to do cool, interesting projects. Thanks very much.
Thank you all very much. Outstanding presentations. So we have about a half an hour for Q&A. If we could ask for the lights to be brought up here near the front of the room, that'd be great. And I'm going to do my best to moderate, and we'll begin by asking questions of those here in the room. Any questions? You please use the microphone in front of you, press the button, and the light will go on. That will help me see you, and by using the microphone, we can hear you. Any questions? Yes, we have one right in the back, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentations. I have a question for Dr. Runcie. You mentioned your collaborator and learning about sort of geography from her and what she learned from you. Could you elaborate a little bit, or if you influenced each other methodologically, and where you maybe had to wrestle with each other about your approaches, or maybe you didn't experience that?
Okay. Is this on? Yes? Okay. Thank you for your question. It was a pretty smooth process. She was just a very generous colleague, and sort of first did a consultation with me, like what are you trying to do with your data? What are you trying to represent? And then only then moved me through sort of the actual mapping process, the use of the data. But she was very comfortable with how I wanted to use my data, and was more just willing to show me kind of the tools that I could bring that vision to life. So,
Thank you.
Thank you all for your presentations. This was really fascinating, and the book is wonderful as well. My question is also initially for Dr. Runcie, but I'd kind of like to open this up for anybody who has thoughts on it. Coming from the library and archives world, and Dr. Runcie, you talked about how this network analysis and these methods can identify gaps in the materials that you were researching. Have you brought that to the attention of archivists and librarians as a way of identifying gaps in the collections that you're using? I can see some potential here for identifying things, the holes in our collections that need to be filled, if not going backwards. Sometimes the material you're talking about with the African porters and medical assistants and professionals, we probably can't capture their stories. It's, you know, it's gone. But going forward, I think both as historians trying to document the now for the future, and as librarians and archivists trying to build the collections that will support this kind of research going forward, the work that you're doing can help us identify holes in that. Have any of you discussed this with your librarians, your archivists, the people that you're working with?
I can answer first and then others. I haven't, but that's a great point. I think the good news is, I mean, I truly do work historically, but from what I've seen, for example, in coverage of the more recent Ebola epidemic in West Africa, that there was concerted work to do oral histories with doctors, with nurses, with African medical practitioners who were really, at the front lines of that epidemic. And so I think, both where different African nations are politically and where scholarship is, there is more sort of creation of knowledge that will be left behind. As you say, I don't think we can do much about the 1940s and 50s, unfortunately, but it's a great point about bringing forward what I see in a conversation with librarians and archivists, something I'll think about. Thank you.
So my take on this is a lot of what is developing right now around in libraries and archives is about finding things that are there, right? Because we're all drowning in content at this point because, as Jeff pointed out, right, there's been an explosion of born digital and digitized sources. And so most of us see the biggest challenge as just finding that needle in the haystack. And one of the things that's done is it's really prioritized the development of tools for finding something when you already have some sense of what it is you're looking for. And one of the things that's done, and I think Sarah's work shows this really nicely, is that it includes the, either the finding something that you don't know to look for, or finding something that, may have been, deliberately obscured, but also that we don't have good methods for identifying the gaps. We don't necessarily have good methods for identifying the lack of coverage or the things that, given that there might be millions or even billions of sources that aren't represented well. And I think in some ways network analysis is a tough way to identify those gaps. There's probably actually better ways to do that at that scale. This is not necessarily at the smaller scale, but at the when you're talking about that level of stuff. But I think as a question, it's going to become an increasingly important one for people who are in charge of collections, but also for us as historians or other people who are researching those kinds of collections, is that we're often, as soon as we show up to that, whatever that search interface is, we're immediately put into that frame of thinking about how to find what we're actually looking for, not thinking about, well, how do I characterize this collection? What is it going to show me? What is it not going to show me? And if there are critical things that may not show me, where would I go to find them? And so I think that, that it might actually be a really, really critical question to start addressing. To my knowledge, not many people are thinking about that right now in any systematic way.
I just have a small point, or two small points to add. One is that I think it's an argument for collaboration, because certainly the way those conversations happen is by working with, in my case, working with university library staff to use the tools, to figure out how to do the tools. So those conversations already begin. So I think it's a kind of follow-on benefit, is that those conversations happen because you've already been talking across disciplines or bridging silos to make this kind of research work. The second aspect that came to mind is that every set of materials, every archive, every network always excludes as well as includes. And so I think sometimes the questions are more, how can we use a range of sources, use a range of techniques? And so one of the things I found most interesting is that, what statisticians, in my case, are not great archivists typically, and they certainly weren't very important. They didn't conceive themselves as doing important work in the 1940s that they would have maybe in the 1980s or 1970s. And so sometimes it's just a matter of trying to use multiple different approaches and different source bases to try and figure out, how do you try and bridge the gaps that are inevitably going to be there. Yeah, but it's an excellent question.
Other questions? I'm going to pose one. Can each of you speak more to the opportunities and or the challenges that you see in publishing your further work in your respective spaces beyond viral networks? Not that that's going to be the title of a future program, but it might be. Can you speak more to the opportunities and challenges in publishing? Sarah, can we begin with you?
So publishing this kind of material specifically? I think there, at least in sort of the world I operate in, I think there would be some limitations. I think to work in the way I talked about today and to publish, I'd have to seek out, for example, different journals than I would in sort of more traditional conception of African history or medical history as the journals I'm familiar with. So I think this volume was fairly unique in the opportunity to combine those ways of working, and also I really liked how Katie pointed out also that the opportunity to actually show process and to show not knowing things, to really be new to something, to being a novice and kind of adopting that position as a scholar is in itself, I think, a pretty unique opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting as there have been big debates in scientific publishing around publishing failed results, for example, or failed experiments, or the replication crises and things like that have really kind of been major issues in that side. And I think in some ways the humanities has similar things that they need to struggle with, because it is in many ways still a kind of a cumulative process of trying to get to a certain point where you have something to share, but not necessarily knowing if it's fully there yet, and that kind of thing. And the humanities isn't really any better at doing that than the sciences are. And I think it's particularly true when you move into new methods, because there's even less sort of grounding for you to build off of, and the body of reviewers you can draw on is much smaller, and it gets a little more complicated. But even the mechanisms of publishing can be problematic, because so many journals still want to be able to do a print edition, and print may be a really lousy format for stuff that is dynamic, or that requires a lot of color, or that just won't squeeze down onto a page very well, or that requires interactivity and that kind of thing. And a lot of interesting work is being done to develop tools that allow you to do that allow you to interact with people's results or their data or that kind of thing. There's just a print model will just never work well for that, and even some of the online publishing models won't work very well for it either. They have to link you out to something else, and so I think there's also platform challenges. So I think it's both a conceptual issue, but also sort of implementation issue that I think is, again, this is not not unique to the humanities, and there's a number of scientific and social scientific contexts in which this is coming up as well. But I think it's a big challenge, in part because of what we do with those publications and how we count them and how we access them. That whole model is changing, and it's happening sort of haphazardly. There isn't a clear kind of direction yet for it. So.
The only thing I was going to add is that history, as you might suspect, is an incredibly conservative discipline. And so in terms of thinking about what we require of our young faculty, what we require of our colleagues, what we require for promotion, that it's an issue that we have conversations in faculty meetings all the time. And people are unwilling to change. And so I think another aspect of the publishing is that so much of academic publishing is driven by credit and credit accumulation in particular environments. And I think one of the struggles that we will continue to have for the foreseeable future is is trying to change some of the culture of history, not to necessarily move away from the monograph, but to perhaps be more inclusive. And especially with, as I've learned, some of this work just takes an immense amount of time to get going. And so if you sink that time in and there's not a monograph that comes out of it, it's not a good use of time. And that further slows down the development of these tools. And so I think the publishing aspect is as has been already pointed out, has problematic aspects, but it's also a kind of epiphenomenon of the conservative nature of academic publishing as a whole.
Let me throw in on that topic that at the NEH we have a grant program that we do in collaboration with the Mellon Foundation, and it's called the NEH Mellon Fellowships for Digital Publications. And the idea is that it's a standard research fellowship, but it's specifically for projects that want to publish their work in a digital publication of some sort. So obviously, like network analysis would be a perfect example where rather than publishing it in a static paper version, you might want to publish it on a website or something like that so that your readers can actually play with the networks and things like that. We created that program for a couple of reasons, one of which certainly is to help scholars be able to publish their work, but also it is designed to nudge the field forward a little bit. We want deans and provosts and others to be able to see that their faculty is getting important fellowships specifically to publish in a digital format. And hopefully that can have a small impact on conservative disciplines and kind of moving the field forward.
If you keep watching the slides, the VT publishing team will come back up. And we owe them a huge debt of gratitude for their involvement in this project. But it was very much done in dialogue with them, and they were experimenting with new kinds of academic publishing. Peter Potter, who came to Virginia Tech as the director of scholarly publishing strategies, came from an academic press, university press background. But we've really been trying to figure out exactly this question that each of you have talked about, which is, what is going to be the new model for scholarly publication, given that current models are really suffering for a whole variety of reasons. There are a couple of things that we did specifically with this volume to address that, and one follows exactly on what Brett just said, which is if you go to the VT Publishing site, you can access not only a PDF version of this, but actually an ebook reader version of this book, of this volume. But you can also look at the data sources and you can look at the data visualizations. And so you're not constrained by the little tiny ones, that you see in the print version. You can actually blow them up and really do some more, really see what goes into these networks. So we wanted to make sure that was possible, and that then freed us up in terms of what we had to do in doing the layout and the design for the print volume and making that available. Obviously, the open access was a key part of what we were trying to do. And so, again, you can get this, version in a variety of different formats. Each of the chapters is available on its own to be downloaded. Each of the chapters has a DOI. So there's that level of kind of connectivity built into this. But I think we were also trying to address the question of scholarly expectations, exactly the one that you brought up. And I think, again, because this was somewhat of an experimental format, it was exploratory. I like that word. We're going to go with that. It gave us, again, some more flexibility. We were not, for example, operating under a strict number of words or a strict number of pages. We just kind of went back and forth about the number, and they said, okay. We could do there's actually two versions of the print book. You can get one that has color diagrams. That's about $20 more than the less than $10 version, which has black and white diagrams in it. That wasn't something we had control over. The online version is completely in color. So we were trying to not only take advantage of the flexibility that we had, but also to experiment with it and see, okay, if we go in this direction, what are we gaining, but also what are we losing? And I think what Katie talked about very, very effectively, about kind of building the exploratory pieces into the chapters themselves. I think we felt like we had more flexibility to do that, partly because of the nature of the workshop, but we weren't operating under the very precise and tight constraints that maybe we would if we were editing a journal or something else. We really wanted to think about not only how this can be the best possible presentation of the scholar's works in the format of these chapters, but how does it engage readers, how does it engage other students, how does it engage other scholars in this continuing dialogue about what you can do with networks, and how to use them. So we wanted to really emphasize that piece of it as much as we could.
One more small point is just we're actually dependent on places like the National Library of Medicine to make this possible. I suppose it's implicit in what we're all saying, but I mean it's actually this kind of publishing endeavor. Is just not typically possible in a lot of the conference, the historical conferences or the kind of traditional venues. And so this is actually one of the great benefits of these collaborative NEH, NLM meetings that really makes these possible. So I just wanted to make it explicit.
Any other questions from our audience? Yep.
Hi, I'll ask a question about kind of the relationship between the scholar and the archivist librarian and kind of the services that we provide you to do your work and that also are meaningful to us. So as a network analysis approach, one might say favor a particular data set over another kind of data set, or if we're doing machine learning or deep learning, another approach or another data set might be more appropriate. So did your cohort kind of discuss maybe what are some of the, it's hard to, nail these things down because they're always evolving and changing, but what kind of data sets or tools that we produce that might be, we could do differently than we have done traditionally, providing catalog records versus finding aids for archival collections, but actually providing data sets to use and to consume, and what might those look like in a kind of changing, evolving world, or is it too broad of a question to even kind of try to tackle?
I'll talk about a couple of chapters that are in the volume that aren't represented up here. To some extent, there's a chronological divide, and so I'm thinking of Lucas Engelman's chapter about the third plague epidemic in the late 1890s, where he had to kind of create his own set of ways to tabulate this data and really think about what the categories meant, not only across a certain period of time, but because he's using consular reports, they use different terms to refer to this disease, and so he had to come up with his own sort of taxonomy. Certainly in the case of Nicole Archambault's that Katie mentioned earlier, looking at the plague, in the ways that again, in the narratives that were told about this disease, the terms changed. And so this was a case where she, at the workshop and then subsequently in the chapter revisions, was trying to figure out how to come up with consistent categories to let her do this kind of diagram to show these connections, but at the same time, not to let the tool over-determine her analysis, and to come back and say, but these are the categories that, are still reflective of how they were thinking about this disease and how they made sense of it in a narrative fashion and so on. And I guess Catherine Sorrells, her work is 20th century on, a kind of network conversation among physicians, but she actually kind of in an initial version was having trouble making these connections because of the way the publications that these authors had been classified in various catalogs. So she had to go back and redo that on her own and come up with some categories that not only made sense consistent with what they were writing, but then allowed her to then look at these connections. And so I think those are places where I suspect, Chris, and what you were looking at, that was already built in because of PubMed and the consistency of these categories, but partly through the workshop format and through the peer editing. Some of the other authors said, okay, if that's the way it works now, maybe I can either work that back into my data, or if I can't, I can make that part of the process of analysis. Why doesn't it work the same way?
Yeah, this is a great question. And one of the things that I think a lot of historians struggle with is that we're getting sources from all over the place, and they're not actually all digitized consistently. And so, if you get some things from Google Books and some things from HathiTrust and some things from, the Medical Heritage Library, and then you get stuff from archive.org, and then you get things from NLM, and then, and then there's all the things that aren't digitized, and you're trying to take all this and put it together. It's a nightmare. It is an absolute nightmare. And not because there aren't tools for converting PDFs into machine-readable data and things like that, but because of what you start with is different in every single case. And so what we end up having to do is just literally hand build a lot of our data sets, even very small ones. Like I wouldn't even try to put together a machine learning data set on this kind of data because it would take my entire lifetime to put it together. And that's not a criticism of the way that archives have operated, but it is a challenge when a lot of different collections have taken different approaches to how they've cataloged things, how they've digitized them, how they've made them available to the scholars. So sometimes you might only be able to get one page at a time. You may not be able to download the entirety of a work and that kind of thing. So there's all of these obstacles, essentially. So we talk about the sort of infinitude of all the digital material that's available, but it's actually only a very small portion of it is available in a form that's already useful for doing these kinds of analyses. And anyone who's ever tried to run, statistics or whether there's machine learning or other things on this kind of data, you very, very quickly run into that problem where actually then your data becomes less and less representative because you're working with only that tiny fraction that actually easily imports into the right format. So I think that's a major challenge right now for historians to adopt a lot of digital tools, is that they often require a kind of data format that if it's already in a database form or if it's already in sort of machine readable spreadsheet form, then it's easy to convert it to whatever you need. But if it isn't in that form, then you've got to do a lot of legwork to make it work, and that ends up being a real barrier, I think, for people to adopt new approaches, because I think, and Chris mentioned this, right, that all of the time that has to go in. I mean, I spent probably at least twice as much time just putting the data together as I did actually running any of the analyses or doing like the kind of core research work. And so I think that's going to be a big hurdle for researchers and libraries and archives to try and figure out how to overcome that, because it will start to skew the research, because people will gravitate to the things that are easier, right? Not just that they're digitized, but they're digitized in a way that's just easier to access, sort of, like some of Chris's sources. I've already, a lot of that work got done, but even then, there's a lot of post-processing that goes into it, and so I think that's going to be a big issue.
Any other questions? Yes.
I wanted to ask Dr. Runcie about the map of Cameroon, and this is not a data question, it's more of a geopolitical question, but I noticed that both with populations seen and not seen clustered in the south, and then up at the top of the country there was another dot representing each. So that most of the northern part of the country, was that not under French control, and they were not bringing those mobile units out into that part of the country?
So it was all under French control, on the part shown, but there obviously is a huge disparity, right? And that in itself is a story that I think is really important, moving from the discourse of the archival record to the mapping. Because if you just read the discourse, and if you don't know any of the names of the towns in Cameroon, or if you don't map it, it sounds like the French are everywhere, right? They're seeing everyone. They're covering the entire territory. And then when you see the map, you see that the reach of these teams is actually quite limited, right? Or quite geographically sort of specific. So I think that's a great case when the map really helps disturb the colonial record as well. Disturbs the colonial discourse of what is, what's said being done. And there's a lot of history behind too, where the dots, where people are avoiding them. This is in the midst of an anti-colonial nationalist uprising that's taking shape in the 1950s, and there's a geography of where avoidance is happening. So there's, again, so much you can do through what seems like sort of simple dots when you can bring out the historical context to really bring that to life. So that's a great question.
Any other questions? Well, if not, I would like to thank everyone for outstanding presentations and for the collaborations behind them. This has been an outstanding session. I want to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities Office of Digital Humanities for their co-sponsorship, my colleague Brett Bobley, and I wish all of you much success in your further work. And thank you again very much for coming today and sharing your research with us. And we will keep in touch and look forward to future projects. And thank you all here at NLM for participating and everyone watching remotely. Thank you.